Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to the Brown China Summit, and particularly to this session on laying the foundation for prosperity, the role of strategic planning in China's rise. And I'm Kenneth Wong. I'm a professor of public policy, political science, and urban studies at Brown University. And I'm honored to have the opportunity to chair as well as moderate the discussion in this panel. And we have a particular focus on this panel. We are going to zero in on a particularly exciting initiative in China, which is the development of the Greater Bay Area, the GBA area. And we have two very distinguished speakers with practical as well as academic experience to share with us their direct involvement in this GBA initiative. In this panel, we are going to examine the opportunities as well as challenges that we face in urban growth. And as you know, the Greater Bay Area is a vast and very resource-rich region in the southern part of China. And it has about 86 million people. With 11 large major cities. Right now, there are actually 3 different sets of currencies being used, and because it involves a lot of cities that are outside of the mainland region. And that is, we've got currency in Hong Kong, we've got currency in Macau, and then we, of course, have the yen, the currency in China as well. So given the diversity of the region, as well as the potential for growth in the GBA, this particular panel will focus on the opportunities as well as the challenges in managing some potential tensions. For example, ecological challenges in terms of land use and management of resources as we anticipate continued growth in population and economic development. We will be looking at the importance of integrating transportation system and infrastructure, as well as workforce development and opportunities. And that's not a very easy task because we're talking about 86 million people in the region. And then another set of challenges, which I hope we'll be able to talk about in the discussion segment of the session, is potential growing inequality in income, educational access, housing access, among other aspects of social and economic opportunities. And finally, of course, we also need to think about the relative balance of centralized authority, planned economy, as well as city autonomy in setting their own priorities in launching and implementing and sustaining this important initiative in the GBA. The 2 distinguished speakers that we have done outstanding work. And first of all, Professor Alain Bertaud is a senior fellow at New York University Marron Institute of Urban Management. And Professor Bertaud was a former principal urban planner at the World Bank. And he has published a very well-received book called Order Without Design, How Markets Shape Cities, published by the MIT Press in December 2018. And over the last 2 decades, Professor Bertaud has been engaged in a lot of very exciting field-based assignments, largely focused on urban transportation, land development, and project implementation in cities of China, India, Indonesia, Vietnam, and South Africa. We also have Professor Hao Li, formerly associate professor in urban planning at Tongji University, and currently visiting research scholar at the MIT Sustainable Urbanization Lab. And Professor Hao has won several distinguished teaching awards when he was a faculty in Tongji University. And she has conducted a tremendous amount of scholarly research that look at the history and urban planning in modern China with a particular attention to the relationship of industrialization and urbanization, the development of urban planning as a discipline, as well as urban-rural relationship. Her current research focuses on the Soviet influence over Chinese planning system. And she also has received honors and outstanding mention of different projects by the Shanghai Municipal Government and Ministry of Education. And Professor Hao graduated from the Graduate School of Design, Harvard University with a master's degree, as well as a doctorate degree in design. So the plan for this session is that we will have Professor Bertaud present his perspective and experience on the GBA, particularly focusing on economic, transportation, and workforce development for 20 minutes. And then Professor Hao will talk about the ecological opportunities and challenges and managers in the GBA for another 20 minutes. And then we'll have about 20 minutes for discussion and Q&A. So please welcome Professor Bertaud. See my slide. Oh, sorry, it's okay. Thank you very much for hosting me. I was delighted by the session yesterday. It was extremely interesting for me, learning a lot. Oh, sorry, yes, for that. Does it work? No. Yeah? No?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So thank you so much for inviting me at Brown. It's my first day in Providence, so I'm learning also something about another city. I would like to talk today about the Greater Bay Area and from the point of view of labor market. Actually, I believe that the foundation of every city is a labor market. And then cities are much more than a labor market, obviously. But this is a foundation. If the labor market fails, the rest of the city and all the things we like about cities, you know, concert hall, restaurant, and things like that are also collapsing. So I think that the point of view of the labor market is important. So this is the outline I will follow. City as labor market, and I will just explain very briefly that the largest the labor market is, the more productive and innovative are the cities. It seems counterproductive. It seems counterintuitive, sorry, because larger is a city, the more complicated it is to manage it. But in spite of that, all the empirical data show that this is what is happening. Then my main point about the GPA is that contrary to what many people think in the US and outside China, they think that you know, the GPA and especially Shenzhen was entirely planned like Brasilia was planned. This is not the case. You know, there are a lot of entrepreneurs, or you know, there's what I would call a spontaneous aspect who came. You know, and that's why, by the way, I think the GPA is not replicable outside China, because it's a combination of government action and spontaneous development. So we will discuss this aspect. Then I will compare the GPA to other cluster cities around the world, and you will see that for most of them, we are talking about a size which is an order of magnitude larger than anything we know. Now, this size, of course, have a challenge. I'm not, by the way, implying that the GPA is right now a completely integrated labor market.
But I think it's on the way, and my understanding is that the Chinese government is taking it very seriously and trying to be very innovative in transport in order to support, indeed, a labor market of around 90 million people. So let us look first at why large, clusters are more productive than others. So this I have discussed that. This is again this paradox that the larger is a city, but the more productive it is. But at the same time, we have to define what is the labor market. It's not the size of the population. You have cities where the transport system is so deficient that in fact the labor market is fragmented, and then those cities are not more productive in spite of their density. So it's really so we have to define what is really the condition. What is a labor market? A labor market, the word market is the most important. It means that workers are free to move inside the market or outside the market. Within the market, they are free to move from one employer to another, and employers are also free to get rid of them and to hire other people. So that's what a free. Now, the other aspect is that there's a mobility within the area where you should be able to go from one side of the metropolitan area, the urban area, to another in less than 1 hour. That means that you are really looking for the best job for you within the entire metropolitan area. And that's why it's most productive, is precisely because you could change job and find the job which is right for you. As you know, we are all very different. We have all very different talent. We have all different interests. And when you get out of college, you don't necessarily get the job you will want all your life. So I think that this mobility is very important to understand in the development of cities. So here is a graph that I come from my book, which I do. I will pass over it very quickly. First, you have the way people commute within a metropolitan area. You have first the monocentric model, which is a traditional model that economists use, which is really valid usually for a city of less than 1 million or 2 million maybe, but is not very realistic for others, although again, as a model, it's a simplification, which is sometimes useful. Then you have the dispersed model, which was created really in North America when the middle class had access to car. Suddenly jobs get completely dispersed again, around the metropolitan area, and therefore the trips are kind of random and dispersed origin, dispersed destination. Very difficult, by the way, to have a transit system working in this condition, and the individual means of transport is the most efficient. Then you have the third model, the composite model, where you have, in fact, the mix of the two. And this is happening in most cities which were largely monocentric before, like, say, New York, London, Paris, or even Shanghai. Most jobs, as the city grew, are dispersing into the suburbs. For instance, in New York now, New York metropolitan area, 70% of the trips are from commuting trips, are from suburbs to suburbs. Only 30% are from suburbs to Manhattan or within Manhattan. And by the way, exactly the same statistics for Paris, which is about half the size of New York. I'm stuck, sorry. I was trying to move from here. Yes, sorry. So the creation of the GBA, that's interesting to know how this came about. And we have a mix of spontaneous order. That means individual people who took the initiative first to move to the GBA from outside the area, but also within the GBA, people who decided, for instance, to create enterprise where they were. The GBA was not created ex nihilo, it existed. I mean, there were many towns and villages long before it was called the GBA. So that's this what I would call the spontaneous order. There is here a quotation of Paul Romer, which also find not only that it was the largest urban agglomeration in the world, but that between 1980 to 2010, the output, that means the GDP, increased 1,000-fold. That means a yearly growth of 20%. This is completely unknown in the history of the world. And I have here to make a very brief confession, is that when I was working with the World Bank in 1984, I think, I went to Shenzhen, and they wanted the World Bank to finance their infrastructure. And they told me, we are projecting a city of 5 million. Could you finance infrastructure? And my answer was, this is unlikely, in 10 years, you cannot do that. We are ready to finance maybe 2 million, because it had, I had to refer to my experience. It has never happened. I looked at, for us, European, the fastest growth was in Germany after the war, the way Germany rebuilt itself. And if I look at it, there was no precedent. So this is one big skeleton in my closet that I refuse to finance it. Oh, sorry. So what happened? I will shift now to the. So first, I think on the spontaneous order, we have the role of town and village enterprise, which I think it was very important. It's something which is forgotten now because nobody uses the name anymore. But in fact, it created a lot of demand-driven small enterprise, which were in fact, they were called collective. Some were still collective, but some were really family-owned. And I think that this spirit of enterprise, this became, in a way, the backbone of small enterprise, which became part then of supply chain that are so, make this area so, sorry. Then the second thing was, of course, the Central Committee designated Shenzhen it was the first free labor market in China. And it was also the first real estate market in China. Before the Danwei, as you know, had to provide housing for their workers, which means that many enterprises, in fact, were managing a housing stock, and managing the housing stock was using more resources than what they were doing. If they were making socks, for instance, they would use more resources managing the housing of their workers than making socks, which was not very efficient. So, and finally, the other ingredient in this success was a massive investment in infrastructure in the entire GBA. That was also something which has no precedent to build so much infrastructure so fast, and I would say high quality infrastructure. So I will go quickly here about the role of township and village enterprise. They were created before they were, in fact, the inheritor of the commune in a central way. But strangely enough, as soon as they had a little freedom, it seems that they immediately link themselves to network of production, and they become very productive, and they had also people investing in them. I remember visiting those town and village enterprise around Wenzhou. I was absolutely amazed of the investment which were there, probably coming from overseas Chinese, or I am not so sure what, but that was also rather unique in the history of the world, the spirit of enterprise. So that's okay. Sorry, it takes time. This is unfortunately, I didn't have a chance to survey the town and village enterprise in at the time I was there. So here, this is a suburb of Chengdu, and in purple here, it represents the area used by town and village enterprise. You see, it represents a very large area, and you see this informality again. The informality of the formation. This is not planned at the central level or even at the provincial level. It is an initiative of individual farmers. Here, it's again another story. This is in Zhengzhou, and in 2006. So you see on the left here, you have the master plan as it is, and it was a master plan done in '95, and the reality on the ground is 2006. And in purple, it's a town and village enterprise. So you see, even in the very strong planning ability of China, this spontaneous aspect was very important in the development. And again, this is not the GBA, but I think exactly the same thing happened in the GBA. So, and then the other aspect of the GBA, and especially in Shenzhen, was the village, which were enclave in the urban area. You know, here I have surrounded them by red lines, and this enclave were completely, demand driven, because the farmer very quickly realized the value of the real estate they were working on, and they developed housing and also office space, which were completely responsive to demand. You know, they were not following standards. They were completely free not to use the planning standards of the city. However, they piggyback, of course, on the macro infrastructure of the city. You know, this would not have been very efficient if they had been alone, but they could piggyback on and the city was smart enough to connect them without, without exerting too many fees or things like that. So there was let's say, one of my colleagues recently, a Chinese colleague, told me that the housing which is available in those villages represent 60% of the housing stock of Shenzhen. I don't know exactly, I've not seen that, but it's certainly a large part of it. So you see that, again, they provided affordable housing because they adjusted the standard to the demand to a large part of the population, especially the migrant population. So this is a stretch. You see that, again, these are very alive. Anybody who has gone in those villages, they are criticized. I know the municipal government in China are not very enthusiastic. For instance, some say that there are bootleggers in this area or even prostitution. And they say, well, we have to demolish them because, I've never seen any country getting rid of prostitution by demolishing building. But, this is, so schematically, this is from here, you see the type of land use you have, which is no urban planner will ever dare to design something like that. But if you go through, you find that it works pretty well, the rents are affordable, and people are rather happy to live there. Again, it's completely mixed land use, completely mixed use. I'm sorry, I can't. So this is an infrastructure which is being built, which has been built, sorry. This is a schematic representation of the rail network, the heavy rail, which link, at the bottom Hong Kong and at the top Guangzhou. And you see there is still a lot to bring. And in itself, heavy rail do not provide complete mobility because by necessity, you cannot have such a large area, you cannot have a station every kilometer or so like that. So you need another means of transportation to get to the station. And I have to access. So this is here in 2010, the accessibility from Hong Kong. So it's not really through the entire thing. It shows how long it takes to go from Hong Kong to different parts. So the red line means 1 hour time. So that was in 2002. This is a new accessibility in 2018. I do not have a map which shows the accessibility now. I'm sure it's improving. I know the government of China is looking at that very carefully. So the Greater Bay Area, one way to measure its success is, of course, skyscraper. You see, they have the most skyscraper tall building. That means a building taller than 300 meters. That means taller than the Eiffel Tower. That's my. And this is an area. So you have here in this area of roughly 150 kilometers by 150 kilometers. You have a labor market which is the equivalent of the a little more than the population of Germany. So again, completely unique. If I compare it to other area, for instance, here in Europe, we have the Randstad. We consider that the Randstad is an example of very successful cluster city. If you look at the population of the Randstad, 8 million. So that means the GBA is one order of magnitude larger than the Randstad. This is San Francisco Bay. You see again, completely dwarfed by the bay. So transport innovation are still needed. It's not enough to have an Everrail. You need also to have new means of transport, probably individual transport, going door to station, station to door. For instance, you see here, this is a picture of the metro at rush hour in Beijing. Now, it's not every day like that, but sometimes it's like that. It shows the limitation of our transport system when our labor market expands. We do not have yet an answer for that. And these are the congestion in Beijing at rush hour. So I think that some of the solution exists already informally. On the right here, you see a motorcycle, which is just, that you find at the end of the subway, at the last station of the subway station in Beijing. And I think this provides really the solution in a way. People pick up passengers at the station, bring them directly to their home, and in the morning do the same thing. So to summarize, the GBA has a larger potentially labor market in the world by far. It's still potential. It's not fully realized because there's still a fragmentation of the labor market because we have not found a transport system. However, if the government manage to provide an infrastructure which integrates this labor market, the GBA will be by far the most productive and innovative region in the world. And again, I believe, unfortunately for us, American or European, that it is not replicable. The combination of a very efficient, energetic government to provide infrastructure and the spirit of enterprise of individual Chinese is absolutely unique, and therefore, so some of these ideas are developed in my book. Actually, in writing this book, I was very much inspired by my work in China, I think. And since November, my book has been translated into Chinese and it's available in China. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. It's also my first time step on Rhode Island, and it's my great pleasure to share with you some of my recent findings. And thank you very much for the invitation for Percy Wong's introduction and for Tom Tyler, especially for organizing this panel. Among the participants of today for the China Summit, I probably, now the voice coming back. Probably the only one who has lived and worked in China in the past 3 years as a planning professor and a planning practitioner. So I'd like to take this opportunity to talk about the recent change and the challenges that is happening in the field of urban and regional planning in China with the geographic focus on the Greater Bay Area. I have a growing interest in the past few years in comparative study. Tongji University based in Shanghai, but I have this growing interest in comparing Shanghai and Shenzhen, in comparing Yangtze River Delta region and the Pearl River Delta region. Before I begin, I'd like to share a little bit of my observation on the features and the contribution of urban planning in China. Urban regional planning plays a critical role in achieving sustainable development by providing the framework for integrating economic, social, and environmental concerns in development decision-making. So the challenges are particularly serious in the Delta regions because those regions are highly productive, like Yangtze River Delta region and the Pearl River Delta region are the two major means of production in the national landscape. They not only support highly productive economy with global significance, but also support a wide range of ecosystem and biodiversity, much more vulnerable to climate change. So to navigate through these challenges are not easy. So that's why we need to coming back to examine what has planning achieved in China and what are the key features of Chinese spatial planning. I guess we all widely discuss about the state ownership of land, urban land specifically, which gave high degrees of government control over land use. And those designation of special planning zones, such as national parks, ecological reserves, or we call the basic farmland, 基本农田, or those pilot reform zones. Those designated zones also provide higher level control of its land use at the same time. And also, don't forget, China as a PRC also as state-owned strategic natural resources, such as ocean, forest, grassland, and mineral resources, etc. In regional planning, I think urban and regional planning in China has this long applied tools of borrowed from the word from political scientist Kai Gerald, called picking winners in space. This uneven development, prioritizing advantages placed area, like in the hope eventually, this spillover effect, the growth poles or growth corridors will bring is surrounding the hinterland to develop eventually together to achieve a even a balancing regional development. That's also a very unique feature of Chinese urban regional planning. Needless to say, there's abundant provision of public amenities. Compare as someone from Shanghai who now live in Boston, like Chinese cities has more robust public transit systems, etc. I will try to save time to do less. Also, the tradition of emphasizing center around a range of industrial space is also a strong tradition, which create a surplus of industrial space in many Chinese cities right now. And also, I don't think I have time to describe the institutional framework that Chinese, those relates to spatial planning right now. But the central, bear in mind, planning is not only a way of scientific arrangement of space, but also express of the politics of space. So planning is always sought by those who hold powers and the resources and the important means of strengthening the idea of the state and working within the current institutional framework. The basic here I outline, which should I put? Here I outline the basic structure this rule of law involving regulation of spatial use. The major one was in the middle, the development land, even you want to divide into residential or industrial. On the other hand, the Ministry of Land Resources also governing, agricultural use. For example, if designated as a 基本农田, basic farmland, you can only plant grain like rice, corn, but not economic crops. And also the regulation over using water resources, using ocean resources they come together to create a matrix of regulations, which also I use this more like red color, solid color to imply this more strict control, top-down control over the use of the space. The recent creation of this called ecological redland, 生态红线, and the national park is lack of legislative support, but is like will be the most strict top-down regulation of those space use in the future. So if you know, there are so many lines of spatial regulation, they will create demands for coordination and supervision and monitoring of those spatial uses. Like, for example, if you look at, I won't say which city in the period of, but if you look at the record, the data from the land use department with the urban planning department, there's always conflicted records of uses. So it creates on one hand, you would say it created a fragmented pattern of development. On the other hand, it created a certain gray area for the local authorities for their discretion governing of the space. Starting from 2018, this institutional reform on the regulation of space created the Natural Resources Administration 自然资源部 to combine all the functions of planning into one organ. So from like formerly belong to Ministry of Construction or the Ministry of Land Resources or Reform and Development Commission. So from the slogan of the reform, 多归合一, one blueprint for all, or 一张蓝图干到底, so stick to the blueprint until the end, you can tell how difficult to coordinate between multiple plans, and even the central government feel the trouble of implementing the plan to the very end, from the beginning to the very end. So for Pearl River, for Great Bay Area, GBA, for example, before 2020, that's what I found. At least I think there will be more than that, like 7 kinds of plan, including environmental protection plan, land use master plan to 利用总体规划, and the reform and development planning of lands, 新型城镇化, new type of urbanization, etc., etc. So from 2020 onwards, there will be, indeed, there should be from 2018 onwards, there should be only one plan for all. But the past, I would say, the past 4-5 years, there will be great debates on what should the new plan called the 国土空间规划 territory spatial plan should be like. What should it control, on which level? So there's this heartburn of territory spatial plan. Maybe for the first time in the past 4 decades in PRC's history, majority of Chinese land are governed by no statutory comprehensive plan for a while. But we are working just fine, you can tell. So far, there's no central state approved official plan yet. Right now, there's only this publicity 公示稿 draft right now on the website. You can all look at it now. So I want to, I need to take the following 5 minutes to briefly talk about the challenges for planning Greater Bay Area. That was the provincial, Guangdong provincial, yeah, sorry, we'll talk about the GBA, but I'm more of talking about from the mainland China side. So from Guangdong province, it's provincial territory spatial planning draft plan. You can see the current, as I mentioned earlier, the regional plan in China mainly about designating privatized development zones and privatized development nodes, like what will be the central city, Guangzhou or Shenzhen or Hong Kong, Macau. And this is a region formed, back to by the theme of my talk today, GBA is a region that formed around the water. And there's always this competitive use of water resources. If you see this involving plans being made in the past 3 decades, this regional plan made by the provincial government in the past decade from 1991 to 2014, and the previous one was made in 2020, you can see this intensification or the densification of urban growth centering around called exterior areas, and this continuous contested use. I found this really interesting. If you see the territory spatial plan publicized by Shenzhen, you can see it's less balanced structure as compared to the Guangdong provincial one. Guangdong, because it's a province, provincial government, you will always want the symmetrical structures, even it's much more stronger in the east bank than the west bank. Shenzhen's spatial plan is more honest, representing. If we look at, I think I have this like very astounding vertical image of this Pearl River Delta max, the distribution of you can tell Shenzhen's spatial plan is more honest to the present like existing situation. So all plans, all regional plans are not only representing, the existing, but they're all more about our future, more about the political decisions and the political context between different powers, authority, and the whole whoever who's resources. The planning, one of the challenges try to coordinate between those infrastructure, especially water-related infrastructure construction among the cities. If you look at this estuary region, there were multiple bridges to be done, including, I think I have, I think have to put that. Okay. Is it on? No. Okay. Yeah. Humen Bridge is the one who built earliest, but then there was always great debate on when and where to build this Hong Kong Zhuhai Aumen Bridge, and the Shenzhen Bridge, and Guangzhou always complain about this Shenzhen Zhongshan Tunnel Bridge blocking the waterway, influence Guangzhou's Nansha port. This competition is quite intense. It's a major mission to coordinate between those water-related infrastructures. And of course, I forgot to say, this coordination between the use of a water resource, fresh water, water supply, to treat of water pollution is already an ongoing project, guided by a regional planning. However, the current debate for this new wave of territory spatial plan making is focus more on the designation of this, how can we balance between development and we call it 生态文明, ecological civilization. I'm almost there. If you look at this regional planning diagram, it looks perfectly balanced. But if we look at, I think Professor Bertaud also showed some of these land use maps. But if you look at why the current debate is very much centered around where to draw the line between development and the nature reserves. It's a heated negotiation among the national, provincial, and the municipal governments because there's not much space left in the area. Luckily, or I don't know, it's just lucky, there was nature, mountains, like withholding the development. If we look closer, if we look at its coastal land, it's not only development use, urban built environment, but also agricultural use. The light green color are agricultural use. Not much like in terms of what they call the ecological space. If we look at closer, if we look at greater, I think I have a better one. If we look at any county or town in 2018 or even now, the existing land use pattern, formerly is called 田中场, like factories, TVE area, factories within the farmland. Right now it's called 田中场, very spare parcels of land, farmland within factories. Can you see the blue color, which is for unused reserve? Can you see this? Only rivers, very small. This town indeed surrounded by Pearl River. This is Pearl River, Dongjiang, Xijiang. So natural reserves only accounted for 6% of existing land use. And if we look at Shenzhen, this Shenzhen is currently Shenzhen city municipal government, they draw a very modest line for themselves, the ecological control line. The brown color are the development land use, the urban growth boundary, and the nature reserve. Look at its sharp comparison between Shenzhen and Hong Kong. So I would stop here. I would. I think the last comment was the greatest challenge and true mission of the strategic planning for these GBA areas is not only to coordinate between construction to designated prioritized development area, but also try to reach a regional consensus through planning process, how to achieve a sustainable development. Such a kind of a consensus shall be only achieved, not achieved through top-down approach, through strengthened national government control, but also like the state has to work with the society, work with the 86 million residents to reach such consensus, to implement that plan to achieve this paradigm shift. So collective action shall be taken facing ecological challenges and climate change that would influence everyone. I think that's the starting point. Of course, it's not easy, but the GBA should and has the capacity to lead in the country to make this paradigm shift possible. Thank you.
Okay, we have, yeah, please. Sure. No? Yeah, please. We have about 15 minutes for discussion and Q&A, and I'm going to start up with a couple of questions first as I was listening to the very coherent, compelling presentations. The first question that I'd like to ask our two distinguished speakers is that in the Western economic system, particularly in the US, we oftentimes look at intercity competition as a source for economic growth. when they compete against one another, when New York City compete against Los Angeles, they try to do better than the other cities. And so what is the nature of intercity competition within the GBA? And both of you implicitly implies that there seems to be some tension among cities, but there are some grounds for collaboration as well. So I'd like both of you to briefly talk about, is intercity competition a source for economic growth or a source for economic stagnancy within the GBA context?
I think that's a very difficult question. I hope I could be the second to answer that. Yeah, I think you are very right. The assumption behind the economist assumption behind this competition is always good, right? It would increase efficiency and the productivity, etc. But as a planner, I think we also, on the other hand, be educated that we call it vicious competition, 恶性竞争 between the cities, and the higher level government has moral responsibility to help to make peace among the brothers and the sisters, and to create a balanced structure. I think the both side has its points. That's as a planner who work mostly in Yangtze River Delta region. I envy for Pearl River Delta region. It has 3 major cities like Shenzhen, formerly is the provincial capital, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, and then Shenzhen and Hong Kong. So it indeed creates the competition among them, create a more balanced and a more open structure. Unlike Yangtze River Delta, Shanghai is like too big, too dominant. So I think that bring vibrancy to the city. But on the other hand, we cannot deny there's this repetitive or this infrastructure construction, like those bridges. We talk about, do we really need that many bridges, that many ports, the airports and the seaports? But an administrative boundary in China is quite solid. So I do believe there are both sides. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, I think that the time of competition between cities within the GBA is past. I think that now their common welfare depends on precisely this integration of labor market. They have already, I think, specialized a bit because maybe competition or maybe because location, location is different. And I think it's time to have an overall, a commonwealth, let's say. I see the problem of fragmentation in New York area, when you have New York City, New Jersey, Connecticut, and we are fighting each other. And it's at the expense, again, of this unified labor market. Yeah. In my little town in New Jersey of Glen Rock, I'm closer to Manhattan than most New Yorkers from the city, which are living in Queens or Brooklyn. But I have much less transport possibility. So I think that there is a time where cities should, the GBA compete with Shanghai, and especially the delta of the Yangtze, certainly, fine. But I think within the GBA, they should recognize that now they have, let's say, they have already specialized and they are complementary, they complement each other, and they have to work on a common infrastructure. They should not mind if somebody from Hong Kong works in Guangzhou, somebody in Guangzhou works in commute on Hong Kong or Macau or what, So I think that it would be very detrimental if they they try to develop an infrastructure to advantage their city at the expense of for instance, you were talking about duplication of airport. You know, that, for instance, certainly this is not a market thing. This is really, at the same time, it's a top-down planning. It's an engineering problem. Yeah. You know, what is the best place for an airport for the GBA, and what is the transport system if they decide to have only 3 airports or 4, I don't know. What is the transport system which allow those airports to serve the entire area, not just Shenzhen or Guangzhou.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So we should be thinking about complementarity rather than the traditional competitive models. That's very helpful for us to understand. The second quick question I have is has to do with the fact that whenever we see economic growth, there's bound to be growing inequality. There's bound to be a widening of the income gap and opportunity gap. So in the West, we often, and also in China as well, we often relied on the centralized kind of direction to resolve some of the inequality that we are seeing. So I just wonder, within the GBA, the areas that you've been working with on transportation, workforce development, and labor force integration, as well as land use, and what are some of the ramifications that we need to anticipate in terms of managing more effectively the anticipated growing inequality in those areas?
I think I picked the wrong seed. Okay. Yeah, I think growing inequality it's difficult for me to pronounce, inequity in GBA area, especially economically and socially, is a great issue right now. The areas facing, for example, this uneven development between, I talk about these priority zones, those grease poles, and with more underdeveloped this hinterland, like a Huizhou or the other area, there's like great disparity. Also within the same city, there's also this gap between like residents and the migrant workers. Yes. And I think right now the region policy speaking first is emphasizing on like a open door education policy, so that the elementary schools and the middle schools opening to migrant children. That's a major initiative. The other initiative is the construction of affordable housing, 保障房, yeah, to provide. But that's I think that is a policy to be observed in the coming years. What kind of affordable housing, like who the affordable housing will provide to, to elite, to professionals, to talents, or to migrant workers? I think that's a question to be answered. Yeah, right now, I think it's mainly this real estate bubbles are driving this inequity in the society and in the economy. So if you are, I bet there must be some Shenzhen students in the audience. If your parents are from Shenzhen, you can inherit housing. So it won't be an issue for you to find a job in Shenzhen. But if you are a migrant, you don't have parents support you, it's almost impossible right now to start a family in Shenzhen right now. So yeah, I stop here.
Well, I think that here, the first thing for inequality, I think, is to give equal access to public services. And it's possible in such a complex region. You know, again, it's the most complex region I have ever seen, and I've seen a lot. So it's very complicated to be sure that they are not little pockets which are forgotten in terms of services or environment. You know, suddenly some area more deteriorated than other. So I think that here, the fight against inequality should be this redistribution to services. and especially education. In China, education is frankly so extremely important. And I don't know enough about education there in the zone, but I'm sure there might be pockets which are not very well served. One other very important, and that again come from just data all over the world, is that sometimes you have pocket of poverty precisely because people do not have access to many jobs, although they are in an area with many jobs. I've seen study like that, for instance, in Mexico City, where even people at a certain time abandon their house because living they have a relatively decent house, but living in a slum in the center of Mexico City improve their welfare compared to living because of accessibility to jobs. So I think that here, this is also an effort which has been done. There might be a tendency to just link the CBD of Shenzhen with Shenzhen, sorry, with Hong Kong, with Guangzhou, with Macau, but that's not enough to link the CBD. You have to again consider that it's a labor market, and anybody who doesn't really fully participate in the labor market because of a lack of transport or too expensive transport will be penalized. Their salary will be less than if they, with the same skills, than if they can compete.
Yes, great, thank you. We'll try to squeeze in a quick question from the audience. Anybody who would like to add? Yes.
Yes, I can just speak up a little bit. Thank you, Hugh, for coming. GBA is especially relative to my personal experience because I am from Shenzhen. So I'm just wondering, since Mr. Bertaud mentioned and also Professor Ho also mentioned the problem of housing in Shenzhen and the general Greater Bay Area, and you mentioned that the urban villages play a very important role in terms of providing affordable housing. From my experience, I see the growth of Shenzhen as the government is taking down villages at the very start of its development, and those successful ones, they stay and then they become the urban villages, and then they provide affordable housing. So I'm just wondering where to draw the line between, oh, we want skyscrapers, we want buildings, and the line between, we still want some urban villages that can provide affordable housing. Where to draw the line between these in terms of development?
Yes. I think that the village are a lesson for planners. That when you have little enclave, which are purely demand driven, that the users themselves select their consumption of land and consumption of floor space. This is the best outcome. Now, I'm not saying that the entire city should be like that, far from it. But what it means is that maybe when there are no villages, the government should create enclave with the same rules as within the villages. This is, by the way, what is done in Indonesia in the Kampung. I don't know if you are familiar with that Kampung Improvement Program, where now, it's a bit similar to the village of Shenzhen in the same way around Jakarta or Surabaya, and the government now recognize the advantage of those zones where you determine, the user determine the amount of space and the amount of land they consume. The government subsidize to a certain extent the infrastructure. The important thing is that those people there have a clean water supply, the sewer is flowing, and the garbage is removed. Sure. And I think that's a way, because if not, the government has a tendency to say the minimum housing standard is that. And because our garbage truck or, need a 6-meter lane or something like that, this is it. And then suddenly you realize that 30% of the population with their salary cannot afford those standards. So the government say, well, we're going to help you. But usually then they are on a waiting list of 20 years before they can get public housing or something, which is not quite the case in China, but it's a case in many other countries. So I think that here, the Shenzhen village are a lesson for if the government cannot afford to provide better housing, to all the people who need it, then let them decide and ensure only the service that the city is supposed. By the way, that includes also schools and dispensary for health and so on.
I just want to add a little bit about urban villages in Shenzhen, because you talk about if we can preserve as affordable housing, like for a migrant or for the newcomer of the city. I think first of all, the question is, who are we? Who decide, who do the cost benefit analysis? Because in the past few years, the housing price and the land value in Shenzhen has become so high, it's already been profitable to redevelop all those urban villages. So the majority of urban villages in Shenzhen already being, we call it 城市更新, called renewed through those urban renewal status, replaced by higher density, even higher density, modern urban development, if they can provide, like they call it 10% of public facilities. I think one, I have to raise one issue. Bear in mind, those urban villages are privately owned. So I think people's attitude towards urban villages changed according from the time. In the beginning, it was very traditional. I think it's this old, dilapidated, we need to renew this. And then we realized it's a very good complementary to urban housing. But then after, if you heard all those stories, these urban villagers become billionaires overnight because of urban development. I think the whole sentiment toward urban villages has changed. If it's like who going to capture the land values increased in the past decades? What if the government can replace them with much more better standard, like housing in a periphery area, which much provide larger public welfare? So these are the questions like hovering over Shenzhen right now. Yeah, I know you have.
Yes,
Yeah,
Quick comment. And then
yes, quick comment. You know, everybody is very upset when the poor become rich for some reason. You know? And they should stay in their place. But I will agree with you. You know, redevelop in the periphery for relatively poor people, but at the condition that they are linked to the center of Shenzhen with a maglev.
Yeah.
So, and cost the maglev, or well, I say the maglev, but you see, if it is at the expense of their participation in the labor force, I think it's a bad deal. It's a bad deal. And probably, in my experience, all governments around the world are doing this bad deal for poor people. You know, this is why you have riots in the suburb of Stockholm. You have riots in the suburb of Paris, you know, in the north, because people have been put outside saying we build nice houses for them. And indeed, the apartments are not bad quality. They're outside the access to the labor market. So they are poor forever.
Well, thank you so much. I know the time is up, and let us thank our two distinguished speakers today. Thank you.